Hello, everyone, and today we are going to be discussing combining like terms. And combining like terms is basically this idea where we are taking things that are similar and adding or subtracting them in an expression. So now recall that an expression is, it's really not that difficult. It's basically an equation without the equal sign. So an expression is a combination of terms without an equal sign. And so the first thing I want to talk about is what's a term. Well, a term is basically a set of symbols sort of put together that actually makes sense for something. So an example of a term, terms, you have, well, 6 is a term. You could have 6a. You could have negative xy, right? Or you could have something like 4b squared. And there are some really essential components to a term, particularly when they have variables and numbers put together. One is the sign. 2 is the number in front of the variable, so that's going to be called the coefficient. Okay, and the coefficient would be, in this example here, 6. And then typically when you talk about terms, you also have what's called a variable, which is a letter normally associated with the term. So those are the variables there. That's a variable right there with the a, or with the 6. Okay, and so every term must have a sign. So this one would be positive. So we'll say negative or positive here, and this one is a positive. And so yeah, so every term has a coefficient, a variable. And one quick note to point out is when you have a variable just by itself, like for example, this is n, what you want to imagine is there's actually a 1 in front of that n. So whenever I see a variable, I actually see a lot of different things. I see 1n to the 1 all over 1, and that is equal to n. But for now, just think about the term 1n whenever you see a variable by itself. Great, so now let's move on to what it means to combine like terms. So if you are looking at a variable, or let's start off with something very simple. So 1 plus 1, well, because they're just numbers by themselves, you can combine them. And so these are two terms coming together, and you get 2, right? Well, another way to think about it also is in terms of variables. If you have a plus a, now remember there's these 1s in front of the variables, right, as their coefficients, and you get 2a. So that right there is an example of combining like terms because the a and the a are similar. So when you have 1a plus another a, you get 2a. And so that's an example of combining like terms. Now let's just change the numbers a little bit. So we have 2a plus 5a, then you would get 7a. Okay. Now, one example that's also important to point out here is that if you have something like 6y plus, let's say, 18ab, what's important to know here is that you can't do anything with these two terms. You cannot combine them because they are not like. This has the y variable right here, and these have not y, right? These are a and b, right? And so that's something that we want to consider. Now, when we have multiple terms, we want to talk about something that's called grouping. Now, grouping is an example of sort of combining like terms when there are multiple terms that would not be combinable. So you have, for example, let's say 2x plus 4 minus 7 plus x. So this is an expression where there's 4 terms, and I could actually combine a few of these, right? So I could just go step by step and just combine what I can, but what I also can do is I can change this to 2x plus x and then plus 4 minus 7. So ultimately what I'm doing is I'm sort of grouping the terms that are alike together before I actually do any kind of simplification here. So then I get 3x minus 3. And that's an example of grouping for that. So that is combining like terms. There are some more complications or some levels of difficulty that we could talk about, but for the sake of what we want to do now with just linear expressions, this is sufficient.